Welcome to Conversations with the Chronicle. Our guest today is Tom Dobrez. He's written a book, helped produce a film, and is now doing a podcast called A More Perfect Place. The book is available at stores in Homewood and Flossmoor and can be found online. So we're going to learn a little bit about some of the people who made Flossmoor what it is today and some of the traditions that continue throughout the village's history. So welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you having me here. Excited to be here.
You mentioned in the book that the centennial celebration in 2024 was kind of a catalyst of this project. When did the idea come to you? Was there a moment?
Yeah, actually, it's the project really literally happened on June 24th, 2024. And that, of course, was the celebration of the 100th birthday of the village. And the day itself was kind of reminiscent of a typical Flossmoor afternoon where people just gathered at the park, Flossmoor Park. There were cars signifying through the decades. There were kids running around. A concession stand was open. You know, all these Norman Rockwell-like things happening that constantly happen here in Flossmoor. But then the capsizing event was the drone show. So if you were there, and the thousands that were there certainly remember it. It was pretty spectacular. It was 800 drones flew through the air, and they were forming the symbols of Flossmoor, things that we all knew and recognized. As simple as they were, there was a baseball hit by a baseball bat, signifying what the Flossmoor Baseball and Softball League means to the community. There was a train. Obviously the IC Railroad and its importance in the growing up. There was a golf ball that actually traveled through the air and went into a hole, and it, of course, the origins of the village being very golf-centric. And then, of course, there was two beer, mugs clicking, and giving support to the Flossmoor Station, which is a foundational business here. So all those things were happening to music. Quite frankly, I teared up, as I think others out in that Mustang ball field did. And I left thinking, we've got to do something to commemorate more of what this town means to people. And that led me to the movie and a book.
And a lot of those images that you saw in the sky you can find in the book, right?
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us through some of the main chapters that help portray the village's spirit?
Yeah, I came across this line with just writing, randomly, and it was like, looking at the origins of Flossmoor, and it was, Flossmoor literally started on the first tee, right? And it was because of the golf course that was really the origins of the village, and folks don't realize it was 25 years before there was even a village after the golf course was here. But then that led me to think, I look at everything to Homewood-Flossmoor High School, to this incredible baseball program I already mentioned, and I was like, and why is it working here? And it was this striving for excellence in a lot of different fields. We've got a park district that has won numerous awards, so I dig into the history of the park district. We have these sculptures that dot the entire village, and it's just something pretty remarkable. And these are world-class sculptures, These aren't just things that just fell off a truck or something. They're very significant pieces of art, and it just echoes what it means to live here in Flossmoor. And then I started to dig into some of the stories of the individuals that made this town, and they're all very fascinating. So it all kind of came together. Obviously, I tried to build chapters in the book about each of these subjects, kind of focus on the golf. Then we talk about the sculptures, then we talk about the park district, the Flossmoor Baseball League, and all those things.
So, and I'm glad you mentioned that you focused on the people that made the community. I think if someone hears history, a lot of times people think back to their high school history book, and it's filled with dates and names, but not so much compelling stories. So, could you describe how the people shaped how you approached the book?
Yeah, I think I came across a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he said, "There is no history, there's only biography." And so that gave me kind of permission to pursue this history of Flossmoor as biography of great individuals, and essentially then the biography of Flossmoor, right? And so it began very early with some of the very founders of the village and some very unique stories that they had. Daniel J. Brumley, the very first president of Flossmoor, and he's one of the only guys with a street named after him in town. And yet his story was fascinating, how he grew up in Ohio and taught schools in rural communities and came here to Flossmoor and found the education system really poor. There was a very beat up schoolhouse, which ironically on the site of Homewood-Flossmoor High School. It was called the Kedzie School. It was 10 by 12. They have kids from 6 years old to 16 in the same classroom with no indoor plumbing, no running water, just an absolute sty of a place. And he said, we need to change that. And he set about doing that and ended up building Levitt Avenue School, another institution that was built before there was a village, right? And so stories like Brumley's and others that really fascinated me. So that's how I wanted to tell the book. And you're right, it's not the dates and the this happened then are in the book, but it's hopefully told in a more like a novel fashion where you hear these interesting stories of these people.
Yeah, and that is, it maybe helps people understand the roots of the things that they're proud of today. I know education is like one of the primary features of the village that people are proud of and support and have throughout the years. And so that tells you, how did that commitment to education get started? And it basically his.
Exactly. He started. There was a school before there was a village, and that foundation, and that lineage, that DNA continued. And the story of Homewood-Flossmoor High School is, it had bumps and some steps, and there was one single individual, Dr. William O. Woodsworth, that they called Dr. Wow, and he built the school. He came from California, and but just he did more than put the buildings up. He established the foundation, the core of identity at HF, the excellence in education that persisted.
Okay, and that's kind of the pattern throughout the book, is tying what's special about the village today that people appreciate and tracing back who helped create that tradition. Another thing that I was struck by is Flossmoor's started out like most communities around here as an all-white village. As the Great Migration came up through Chicago and then started into the suburbs, Flossmoor became majority black and is today, but has also had other diverse religious influences, different people from all sorts of different traditions and places. And for an all-white school or all-white community to embrace that diversity is not unheard of, but not common in our country. And you also kind of help trace the people who helped make that happen, create that welcoming environment, in spite of bumps, because they had them too. But, who are some of the people who really made that happen?
Mayor Burt Reed stands out, a Jewish man that moved to Flossmoor, and he primarily for golf. His father-in-law was a big golfer at Ravenslow Country Club, and they moved, him and his wife, and he became the mayor of Flossmoor 5 years later. And you're right, though, the origins were, it was always economically diverse, particularly HF High School, but religiously diverse. And now when Burt Reed and family moved into Flossmoor and became mayor, it became, particularly the subdivision of Heather Hill began to integrate. And there was some pushback and things that were happening. And we're talking about the late 1960s, early 70s. And Burt Reed, as the mayor, as a leader, as a volunteer, not paid at all, led the integration by saying, it's okay, people, and we're going to keep this community, and these are wonderful, everybody that's moving into this community belongs here, and they're welcome here. And there was a couple of things they needed to do early on, and Bill Austin's name pops up as well in the book. they decided to park outside the street one night of an African-American family that had moved in, and just to make sure and send a message to the rest of the community that this is all going to be okay. And then, of course, we had the Ali family, the Joe Simons, you know, some very famous African-Americans that moved into town. And it just began to coalesce into the community that it is. And so I wanted to study that too, like, why is it working here?
Yeah, and the early black families who moved in had a big impact on that too. I think of the Pages. You talk about them in the book too.
So Susan Page, I'm sorry, but that was the daughter. Susan Page ended up becoming a U.S. ambassador. But yeah, Maurice Page and her husband became the first black residents in 1965. They moved into a pretty storied street with only 8 houses on it. There was a lot of history on a single street at Sylvan Court, and actually located on the far east side of the village. A lot of people don't even know where Sylvan Court is. For the older folks, I said, well, it's behind Nelson's gift shop. They used to be there, so that put a little marker on it. But that particular street, you know, became part of Flossmoor, and that's, you know, leads to a whole chapter on Sylvan Court, just a single street. But the Pages in there, they were redlined. They were having difficulty getting a loan for the home. You know, they had plenty of income, and essentially bank after bank was refusing to give them the money they needed to purchase the home. Eventually Hyde Park Bank came forward and said, we will do this because that's what we want to do, and they became the first black residents. And so their story is very interesting, and then, like I said, the success of that family is pretty significant.
Indeed, and the first of many, of course, since the village eventually became more racially diverse. There's also interesting stories in there about the Ali family, not just Muhammad Ali, who is world famous, but how his children experienced it. So it wasn't all sunshine either, right?
Right. Yeah.
Miriam.
Now, Miriam Ali was you know, that was, you know, I'll speak about Miriam in particular, but it also was echoed by everybody I called for this book. They just said, I'll be happy to talk about this village, you know. And so, you know, I called people that were in Virginia now, Arizona, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's son. And eventually I got connected with Miriam Ali, who still lives in Flossmoor. And she, of course, is Muhammad's daughter. And he had 4 children with Belinda Boyd at the time. She has changed her name. But they grew up in this community. They went to the schools, you know, they went to Heather Hill, and they went to Parker, Flossmoor Junior High, and then HF. And it wasn't always easy for them. You know, Miriam in particular talked about how it was kind of a dual-edged sword, first being African-American and second Muslim, and then being Muhammad Ali's, you know, daughter. And so all that added up. And she put a lot of it off as just kids being kids. But then it became institutionalized when she went to HF. And but you know, she's now very successful. She does a story, a one-woman show in Chicago that she talks about some of these escapades in Flossmoor. But she's back here and living here, and you know, like I said, was more than willing to talk about her experiences growing up here.
Yeah, that's one thing I think about is that you can't escape racism in this country, but Flossmoor is kind of uniquely situated to deal with that, I think, because of the welcoming environment that was established early on, or at least in the 60s especially. But there are other significant people that were in Flossmoor, shaped it. I know you mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gets a section of the book. And there are others too. Who are some of the people?
Yeah, so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross obviously went on to write On Death and Dying on her back porch in Flossmoor. So for me, I found that it's just a significant event that changed really culture in America. And but there are others whose efforts were uniquely focused on making Flossmoor a better place. People like Betty Irons, who moved down here. Many people know Irons Woods, and yet they're like, Irons Oaks, I'm sorry, but they don't know who Betty Irons is. And so as I dug into her story, it was remarkable. Here was a woman that grew up in a very small farmhouse in southern Illinois, no indoor plumbing, no electricity, And she has a very funny story how she met her husband, Irons, who was Spencer Irons, whose family was one of the original families of Flossmoor. And so the connection turns out that Betty marries Spencer, they move back to Flossmoor, and she discovers that there's Flossmoor Park is it as far as a park district goes, and that there was quote unquote a Flossmoor Recreational Park District. However, it was just worried about killing weeds, and there wasn't programming and there wasn't a whole heck of a lot going on. And she decided to change that, and a few years after joining the board, she ended up engineering the merger with Homewood. And then obviously now it's the Homewood-Flossmoor Park District, but she went from one park to what it is now is 30, 40 parks in the park district, and award-winning, like grand gold medal winning, which is very significant awards. And so Betty Irons' story is very unique, and it's very storied, and she went and made a difference as a single person, unpaid volunteer, and you'll see that arc kind of going throughout the book as well.
There's another theme.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I don't know if that's the main theme of the book. Would you consider it the volunteerism?
I think at the end of the day, that's what happened, yes. And if you think about, whenever they show pictures of DNA, it's like a double helix, so things weaving in and out. And that's kind of the book, too, is you'll see these individuals and then events, and then them doing something that's leading to another thing that's leading to another thing. And and 90% of it was volunteers. As I said, even Burt Reed was a volunteer mayor at the time. And there were Betty Irons. And then you go back to the middle of the Great Depression, and a group of women that started the Flossmoor Garden Club. And then the Garden Club put on a show called the Flossmoor Flower Show. And it was held at the community house in Flossmoor, from the community church. And it was attended by thousands of people. It was the front page of the Chicago Tribune. 4,000 people would make their way through a weekend, and they would completely convert the inside of the community house to a floral extravaganza. You would walk under flowered arches into, it would be set up like street markets, European street markets, and then there's a stage there at the community church, still community house, still there, and that would be a Japanese garden with running water, and just a significant event. And as I said, it was in the the 1930s to 1935, and it was really Flossmoor's first volunteer-run event in the middle of the Depression. And then that turns into the Flossmoor Book Club, which they end up building a library, which then turns into things like Curtain Call, which many residents remember at Infant Jesus of Prague for years, of all-run volunteer event that attracted people. And that evolved, to the Hidden Gem Half Marathon. So just an example of that volunteer spirit running throughout the years.
You came by that, honestly. Your mother was.
Yep, yeah.
And your mother-in-law, too, were important volunteers.
Yeah. Curtain Call just had, for from 73 to 96, it was a very significant event that attracted thousands to the area, and people were just showing off their talents. And it created a volunteer spirit where you ended up meeting people you didn't necessarily know as well, right? And so you end up working with them over the course of a couple of weekends. And then you'd see them at the grocery store, and it connected people. And that's what the Gem is, just an extension of that.
Yeah, volunteerism and excellence are kind of intertwined, aren't they? Because Flossmoor never does anything halfway.
That's right, yes, yeah.
The Hidden Gem, in its first few years, has already been named the Chicago area. Is it Chicago area?
Chicago Area Runners Association, CARA, yeah.
Race of the year, 3 times, right?
3 out of the last 4 years, yep.
Yeah, not bad for a young race.
Yeah, so we've only done it 6 times. So yeah, that's very significant. But yeah, and that's the thing too. It's none of these events are schlocky, if you will. It was the flower show was the best there was. Even the Flossmoor Golf Club was the best it was. And then the library was setting records for a number of books being checked out. curtain call had a level of production that was remarkable. And The Hidden Gem is just an echo of all that, and saying, yeah, we weren't going to do just a race. It ends up being, this really significant date on the calendar of a lot of runners throughout Chicagoland and, quite frankly, all of America and the world.
I was going to say, you're getting runners coming from everywhere now, right?
Yeah.
And then it sells out in, what did it sell out in last year?
Well, it took 5 days for sellout, and we're anticipating it'll be a lot less this year. So,
People are waiting.
yeah, we're getting a lot of inquiries already. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it really helped put Flossmoor on the map in the running world anyway. And speaking of not doing anything halfway, a lot of people write books, but you didn't stop there. Tell us what else is a more perfect place.
Well, the true timeline was it started as a movie, it turned into a book, and then became a movie again. So, originally I thought the easy way out would be to make a movie, and then that way it would be, something that we could use to promote the village. But as I began to research, I'm like, this is, a pretty significant story. Not just the history part, but some of those themes you and I have already talked about, the integration and the excellence in the school and what makes it work, and how can you have a high school that produced not one but 2 U.S. ambassadors, and, just have a significant amount of achievements. And so as I got into the book, I was really like, okay, this is really a good story. The movie kind of fell by the wayside as I focused more and more on writing the book. And I had the book was about 80% finished. And I went to write the first chapter. And I was like, the intro, like, how do I get into this story? And it hit me that the Hidden Gem Half Marathon was a great vehicle to tell the history of Flossmoor, in that the runners themselves, they run through the history of Flossmoor. So as they are on the course, they're going through Ballantrae, which is predominantly African American and the most recent development. Then they go to run past Coyote Run Golf Course, which has a significant story when the people decided to keep it versus a housing development. And they said to keep it green, we'd rather our taxes go to building a golf course or a park district facility versus selling it to a housing development. And then they run through the high school, which has its own history, right? Heather Hill, we talked about the integration there. And so the runners make their way past Flossmoor Country Club, and run on all these streets named after golfers, or golf terms. And then they go past Flossmoor Park, where the baseball league started. And so it became a great narrative arc by which to tell this story of Flossmoor's history. And so I wrote the chapter, and literally as I finished that introductory chapter, a gentleman named Joe McGrath called me, and he says, hey, we'd like to wonder if you'd be curious if we could film the Hidden Gem for a promotional video for you. But going back to what you said, we was like, well, we really don't need a promotional video because we sell out in 5 days. However, I have this other idea of telling the history of Flossmoor through the race. And he got it, he bought right into it. He understood my vision for that. And together with Michael Goldberg, we put together a script. And we had 1 day to get it right. We, of course, had all these historic elements. We had pictures of old Flossmoor, the Civic Center, and a lot of those things. But we wanted to tell, as the runners were running through the community, we wanted to tell the history of Flossmoor that way. And so there were certain shots we had to get, and we had only 1 day, which is the day the race was run. It was a beautiful September morning. The sun was coming up. We just captured Joe and his crew, which included a lot of HF graduates and current students. We had 7 or 8 videographers on the course recording it all. And they captured some spectacular moments, and then Joe put it all together in a beautiful piece. And so the movie is called Flossmoor, A More Perfect Place, and we're showing it once a month, mostly at the Homewood Science Center, primarily because it's a beautiful theater there. And you can go to flossmoorhistorybook.com and buy tickets for our various showings. But we wanted to also keep it as a theatrical release because it's such a beautifully shot movie, and the theme, hopefully people have seen it have really enjoyed it.
So that'll be ongoing for the foreseeable, that people will be able to see it if they go to the Science Center for once a month showings?
Yeah, and we've also offered it up for charities in town if they want to use it as a fundraiser. We've had a couple that have done that already, and so we just want to control when and where the environment is because of the quality of the film. Yeah.
Great. And then the next phase or the next project is also getting going, the pod, right?
Yeah, so the old media is go everywhere, be everywhere. So I do have a radio background, and so I understand how to produce audio. And I said, well, you know what? I think there's people might be more interested in short vignettes versus reading a book, and then or even the movie may have tickled their interest in hearing more about Flossmoor. And so I created a little series called Flossmoor in 15, and each Friday it releases on all the Apple and Spotify and all the podcast distributors. And it's just, we'll take a short little brief topic, some of the stories I've told today, just in a little bit more concise form, and deliver that in the time it takes you to get to the metro station, right?
Sounds good. Are you cooking up any more ideas, or are you just?
Yeah, well, we're pretty good here. We are taking a lot of input from citizens that see the movie about what to do next, how maybe to break the movie up into smaller chunks to make it more social and use it socially. We're working with the Foundation for the Preservation of Flossmoor History to kind of work with them and coordinate some showings with them. And I would like to see a real a community outreach about, hey, here's a nice thing to consider doing next.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for capturing the history of Flossmoor in a compelling way. I'm a fan of local history myself. I appreciate whenever anybody puts the incredible amount of time it takes to chase down stories, check facts, and then craft it into a story that's something that's readable and helps you understand the people involved. So thank you for doing that. You do in the afterword trace back some of the other Flossmoor history projects and books that have preceded you, and it's good to give credit to all those people who over the years have captured the local history and kept it alive. So I'm glad that you've added to the canon and continue to. So are there things that, anything else you want to make sure that the community knows about the whole project?
Well, we're in a special place, and a more perfect place, as I like to say, and but it doesn't happen by itself, and that's really what I hope those that read the book realize, is that it's in the agency of individuals that great things have happened in this community. We mentioned a lot of those names and they were individuals, but they gathered community around them. They were leaders. Betty Irons saw the future of parks. D.J. Brumley saw the future of education. And these individuals, Bert Reed saw the importance of integration. All these people were just Joe citizens, that stepped up, saw an opportunity to contribute, and created something very special. And things don't have to last forever. Levitt Avenue School's not here anymore. They don't do curtain call anymore. However, it's the fact that it's in our blood now, and that Mayor Michelle Nelson calls it the superpower of Flossmoor is the volunteers, and so step up. And participate and see where you can help. And if you're not a leader, there's always room for everybody. Yeah.
I was going to say the Hidden Gems, an example. You get people all over the village coming out to do their part.
Yeah.
They're cheering or being marshals or checking in runners. There's all sorts of different ways to contribute.
Yeah, and that all adds to making it the race of the year is the simple decorations on people's yard and the pride that the runners feel. And so right now that's the thing, the hidden gem. But who knows? 20 years from now, there may be something else that becomes. But it will still be here, and it begins with one person. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thanks for having me. Yeah.